They said I was too old for college. At 68, I walked into orientation. My family laughed and said, "That's for kids." 4 years later, I graduated top of the class. The keynote speaker, my granddaughter, who didn't know I was the anonymous donor funding her scholarship. My name is Margaret, and for the better part of 50 years, my life was a novel written for someone else. I was a wife to a good man, my Paul. I was a mother to a son I adored, my Tom. Then a grandmother to his brilliant daughter, my Chloe. I was a supporting character in their stories, the quiet, reliable presence who baked the birthday cakes, mended the torn clothes, and kept the hearth of our family warm. I had my own story, of course, a slim, unfinished volume tucked away on a dusty shelf. It was the story of a young woman who loved history, who had devoured books in the university library until she had to drop out after her sophomore year to marry Paul and support his burgeoning career. It was a choice I never regretted, but the ghost of that unfinished chapter always lingered. After Paul passed away, the silence in our home became a deafening roar. The routines that had once structured my days, making his coffee, discussing the evening news, the simple comfort of his presence in the room, vanished, leaving a gaping void. My life became a series of quiet days, punctuated by my sons, family visits, where I would happily slip back into my familiar role as mom and grandma. But once they left, the silence would return, heavier than before. I felt myself shrinking, my world contracting to the four walls of my house. The idea came to me on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. I was sorting through a box of Paul's old things and came across my own long-forgotten college textbooks. I ran my fingers over the faded cover of A History of the Renaissance, and a powerful, undeniable longing surged through me. It wasn't just nostalgia, it was a deep, resonant ache for the person I had been. The person who had loved the thrill of learning, the challenge of a new idea. On a whim, I went to my computer and looked up the local state university, the very one I had attended all those years ago. They had a program for senior citizens, a simple auditing option. But then I saw the application for a full degree program. History. My old, abandoned love. A seed of a wild, improbable idea took root. What if I didn't just audit a class? What if I finished what I started? What if I finally wrote the last chapters of my own story? At 68, the thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. I felt a spark of life, a sense of purpose I hadn't felt since Paul was alive. I spent a week secretly filling out the application, my heart thudding with a nervous, youthful energy. When the acceptance letter arrived, I held it in my hands and cried, not with sadness, but with the overwhelming joy of reclaiming a lost piece of myself. I decided to tell the family at our regular Sunday dinner. My granddaughter, Chloe, was there. She was in her senior year of high school, a brilliant, driven young woman with her heart set on studying environmental science at the same university. She was a constant source of pride for me. As we were clearing the dinner plates, I took a deep breath. "I have some news," I announced. "I've been accepted to the university for the fall semester. I'm going back to finish my degree in history." There was a moment of stunned silence. Tom, my son, was the first to speak, a look of utter bewilderment on his face. He let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Mom, that's great," he said, stumbling over the words. "But are you serious? College? Isn't that, for kids?" His wife, Karen, chimed in with a gentle, patronizing smile. "That's so sweet, Margaret. It's wonderful you want to keep busy. But what would you even do with a history degree at this point?" Their words, meant to be kind, perhaps, felt like tiny, sharp pebbles pelting me. They saw my dream as a quaint hobby, a silly eccentricity for a lonely old woman. They didn't see the hunger behind it, the decades of quiet yearning. Chloe was the only one who seemed genuinely excited, but even her enthusiasm was tinged with the same gentle condescension. "Wow, Grandma, that's amazing," she said, her eyes wide. "We could be on campus together. We could have lunch. It'll be so cool." The subtext was clear. It would be a novelty, a cute story to tell her friends about her quirky, 68-year-old grandmother who was keeping busy. They loved me, I knew they did, but they could not see me as a peer, as a person with an intellectual life as rich and valid as their own. Their laughter, however gentle, echoed in my ears. It didn't deter me. It fueled me. There was another matter pressing on my mind. I knew from conversations with Tom and Karen that while they were proud of Chloe's ambitions, the cost of a 4-year university education was a source of immense stress for them. Chloe was brilliant enough to earn academic scholarships, but there would still be a significant gap. Paul had left me financially secure, more so than my children realized. I wanted Chloe to have the freedom to pursue her passion without the crushing burden of debt that had shackled so many of her generation. But I knew their pride would make accepting direct help from me difficult, if not impossible. So, once again, I found myself turning to a quiet, secret solution. I met with my lawyer, the same man who had so patiently guided me through the complexities of Paul's estate. I want to establish an anonymous scholarship, I told him, a significant one, through the university's Financial Aid Foundation. We designed it carefully. The Paul and Margaret M. Legacy Scholarship would be awarded annually to an incoming freshman from our state, with a stated preference for a student pursuing a degree in the sciences with a focus on environmental studies. The criteria were tailored so perfectly to Chloe that she would be the ideal, almost inevitable candidate. But her name was never mentioned. My name, as the living donor, would be kept strictly confidential. The university was simply told the funds came from a private family trust dedicated to education. My lawyer, a kind man named Arthur, looked at me with a knowing smile. "This is a remarkably generous gift, Margaret." "It's not a gift," I corrected him gently. "It's an investment in a future I believe in a young woman I believe in. I just want her to be able to fly without looking down and worrying about the cost of the fall." The weeks leading up to orientation were a flurry of activity. While Chloe was excitedly shopping for dorm room supplies, I was nervously buying notebooks, highlighters, and a new laptop. The day of freshman orientation arrived, a hot, humid August morning. I drove to the campus, my old sedan feeling distinctly out of place among the SUVs packed to the gills with the belongings of students 50 years my junior. Walking into the orientation hall was like stepping onto another planet. The noise, the energy, the sheer, unadulterated youth of it all was overwhelming. I was a gray-haired island in a sea of brightly colored t-shirts, ripped jeans, and faces illuminated by the glow of smartphones. Students swirled around me, their conversations a rapid-fire dialect of slang and pop culture references I didn't understand. A few gave me curious glances, polite but questioning, likely assuming I was a lost parent or a new faculty member. I felt a surge of panic. A voice in my head screaming, "What are you doing here?" Tom was right. This is for kids. I took a deep, shaky breath, clutching the strap of my new backpack. I thought of my half-finished degree. I thought of Paul's unwavering belief in me. I thought of my family's gentle, dismissive laughter, and my resolve hardened. I was not a lost parent. I was not a hobbyist. I was a student. I found a seat in the back of the massive auditorium, a solitary figure amidst the buzzing hive of new beginnings. I watched Chloe walk in with a group of new friends, her face alight with excitement and promise. She scanned the crowd, but her eyes passed right over me, not registering me as part of her new landscape. For a moment, it stung. Then, a strange sense of peace settled over me. We were two independent women starting our own parallel journeys on the same hallowed ground. Her journey was being made possible by my secret. My journey was being fueled by her unwitting inspiration. As the Dean of Students began his welcoming address, I opened my new, crisp notebook. The scent of fresh paper filled my senses. I uncapped my pen. The speaker's words washed over me, but what I heard was the sound of my own story, its final chapters waiting to be written. The fear was still there, a low thrum beneath the surface. But for the first time in a very long time, it was eclipsed by the exhilarating, terrifying, wonderful feeling of a new beginning. The first few weeks of university were a brutal, humbling education in just how much the world had moved on without me. It wasn't the history that was difficult. The stories of empires and revolutions were old friends. It was the logistics of modern student life that felt like a foreign language. My first challenge was the student portal, a bewildering online maze where syllabi were posted, assignments were submitted, and grades appeared. I spent an entire weekend with a furrowed, brow and a pounding heart. Watching online tutorials meant for digital natives just to figure out how to upload my first essay. I felt like an archaeologist trying to decipher hieroglyphs, a profound sense of being an analog soul in a digital world. My classes were both a sanctuary and a source of deep anxiety. I would sit in the vast lecture halls, a small, gray-haired island in a sea of vibrant youth, and feel utterly invisible. The students around me chattered about parties and dating apps, their lives a whirlwind of social activity that I observed from a distant, silent shore. They were kind enough, holding doors open or offering a polite, fleeting smile, but it was the kindness one affords a visiting grandparent, not a peer. In their eyes, I was a curiosity, a gentle anomaly who had wandered into the wrong room. But then the lecture would begin, and the world would fall away. My history professors were brilliant, passionate scholars who could make the dusty corridors of the past come alive. As they spoke of the Italian Renaissance or the complexities of the American Civil War, the 50 years that separated me from my classmates would dissolve. I wasn't just learning dates and names. I was connecting the dots of a lifetime of reading, of watching documentaries, of listening to my own father's stories about his time in Europe after the war. My life experience, which felt like a liability in the bustling student union, became my superpower in the classroom. The turning point came during a seminar on 20th century American history. The professor, a sharp woman named Dr. Allister, was leading a discussion on the post-war suburban boom. The students spoke intelligently, quoting from the assigned texts about economic expansion and cultural shifts. Then, Dr. Allister turned to me. "Margaret," she said, her eyes twinkling as if she knew the untapped resource I represented, "you would have seen the very beginning of this era? What did the textbooks miss?" A hush fell over the room. 20 pairs of young eyes turned to me. For a moment, I panicked, but then I started to speak. I didn't talk about economic theories. I talked about the smell of new lumber and fresh paint in the tract homes that sprang up overnight. I talked about the sudden influx of household appliances that promised to liberate women but often just raise the standards of domestic perfection. I described the quiet anxieties beneath the cheerful facade, the Cold War drills at school, the way my mother and her friends would talk in hushed tones about the world beyond their manicured lawns. I wasn't quoting a book, I was bearing witness. When I finished, the room was silent for a moment before Dr. Allister simply said, "Thank you, Margaret. That is history." After that class, a young man approached me. He was serious and thoughtful, with wire-rimmed glasses and a stack of books always under his arm. "That was fascinating," he said. "My name is Liam. I'm a history major, too." We started talking, and an unlikely friendship was born. Liam wasn't interested in my age, he was interested in my perspective. We became study partners, meeting in a quiet corner of the library, the grand, hushed heart of the campus that quickly became my favorite place. We would debate historical arguments, share research sources, and quiz each other before exams. In Liam, I found my first true peer in this new world, someone who saw me not as a grandmother or a novelty, but simply as a fellow scholar. My life settled into a new rhythm. Days were spent in the library, losing myself in the quiet companionship of books. Evenings were for studying, for writing papers that I poured my heart into, my mind feeling sharper and more alive than it had in decades. The weekends brought the jarring transition back to my other life, the one where I was just mom and grandma. At our Sunday dinners, the questions about my school project continued. "Still enjoying your little classes, Mom?" My son Tom would ask, his tone affectionate but laced with an undeniable condescension. "It must be so interesting, seeing how different things are now," his wife Karen would add, as if I were a tourist visiting a foreign country. They never asked about my essays, my grades, or the specific historical periods I was studying. Their interest was superficial, a polite inquiry into my hobby. The centerpiece of their university-related conversation was always Chloe. And rightly so, she was thriving. She had joined the debate team, was volunteering for an environmental group, and was earning top marks in all her classes. I swelled with pride every time she spoke about it. One evening, she arrived at dinner glowing with a special excitement. "You guys are not going to believe this," she announced, waving a letter. "I got it! The Paul and Margaret M. Legacy Scholarship!" My heart stopped. I felt a dizzying rush of emotions. pride, love, and the heavy, complicated weight of my secret. "Oh, honey, that's wonderful," Karen exclaimed, hugging her. "We're so proud of you," Tom said, beaming. "I knew you'd get the best scholarships. What is that one? A memorial fund?" "It's amazing," Chloe explained, her eyes shining. "It's from a private family trust, and it covers almost all of my tuition and expenses for all 4 years. The founder is anonymous, but they included a mission statement with the award letter. It's all about investing in the next generation's potential to create a better, more sustainable world. It says," she paused, pulling the letter from its envelope, "We believe that true legacy is not what you leave behind, but what you help set in motion." She looked up, her face earnest and full of inspiration. "It feels like such a huge responsibility. Someone I don't even know has this incredible faith in me. I have to live up to it. I have to make them proud." I sat there, my slice of roast beef growing cold on my plate, a lump forming in my throat. I wanted to tell her, to say, "I know you'll make me proud, my darling. I already am." But I couldn't. I just smiled, a quiet, watery smile, and offered my congratulations. I listened as my family celebrated the generosity of a mysterious stranger, never once suspecting that the stranger was sitting right there at the table with them, a woman they thought was just amusing herself with a little school project. As my first year drew to a close, the 2 halves of my life felt more distinct than ever. At home, I was the quiet, elderly matriarch whose academic pursuits were a cute, harmless hobby. But at the university, I was acing my exams. I was Margaret, the history student whose essays were sometimes read aloud by professors as examples of insightful analysis. I was Liam's respected study partner. I was a mind, sharp and engaged, devouring knowledge with the hunger of someone who had been starving for 50 years. One afternoon, studying for my final exams in the library, I looked up from my book on the Medici family. Across the cavernous reading room, I saw Chloe, surrounded by her friends, laughing as they highlighted their own textbooks. She looked so happy, so confident, so full of boundless potential. My secret gift had given her that freedom, the freedom to soar without fear. And her existence, her brightness, gave me the strength to continue on my own quiet, parallel path. My family might not see me, not the real me. But I was finally, after all these years, beginning to see myself again. And that, I realized, was a legacy all its own. My sophomore and junior years at the university were a deep, immersive dive into the world I had craved for half a century. The novelty of my age, both for me and for others, began to wear off, replaced by the comfortable, demanding rhythm of genuine academic life. I was no longer just the quirky grandmother taking a class. I was a history major, and a damned serious one at that. My life, which had felt like a quiet, empty house, was now filled to the rafters with the weight of books, the thrill of discovery, and the quiet satisfaction of a mind fully engaged. I found my niche in medieval history, a period of profound upheaval, faith, and artistry that resonated with me on a cellular level. I spent untold hours in the university library's special collections, a hushed, climate-controlled sanctuary where I was allowed to handle manuscripts from the 15th century, the feeling of my gloved hands touching the same vellum that a monk had painstakingly inscribed 600 years before was a connection to the past so visceral it left me breathless. This was not the stuff of hobbies, this was communion. My friendship with Liam, the serious young history major, deepened. We were an odd pair, the 69-year-old woman and the 20-year-old man. But in the world of ideas, our age difference was irrelevant. We were simply 2 minds wrestling with the same questions, fueled by the same passion. We'd spend hours debating the socio-economic impacts of the Black Death or the political motivations of the Medicis, our conversations a lively, respectful, parry and thrust of arguments and evidence. Dr. Alastair, my professor, had become my mentor. She saw the seriousness of my purpose and took me under her wing, pushing me to tackle more complex research, encouraging me to think not just as a student, but as a historian. "You have a perspective, Margaret, that none of these kids can possibly have," she told me over coffee one afternoon. "They see history as a story that happened to other people. You've lived long enough to see the echoes, to understand that the past is never truly past. Her respect was a balm to the part of me that still smarted from my family's gentle condescension. The chasm between my academic life and my family life widened into a vast canyon. At Sunday dinners, I would be brimming with excitement over a new primary source I'd uncovered or a fascinating lecture on Charlemagne, but I learned to keep it to myself. When I once tried to explain the focus of my term paper on the role of women in medieval guilds, I was met with blank stares and a polite, "Oh, that's nice, Mom," from my son, Tom, before he changed the subject to his golf game. His wife, Karen, with her endless, well-meaning practicality, would ask things like, "But is it a lot of work? You seem tired. Are you sure you're not overdoing it?" They saw my passion as a strain, my intellectual exertion as a risky activity for a woman my age. They wanted me to be resting, to be safe, to fit neatly into the box they had built for me labeled Grandma. Their concern, I knew, came from a place of love, but it was a love that sought to contain me rather than understand me. They tried to get me to join a seniors bridge club, to sign up for a guided bus tour of New England. They simply could not compute that my happiness lay not in leisure, but in the rigorous, demanding work of scholarship. My attempts to bridge the canyon were met with a kind of baffled incomprehension. I was living a life so far outside their frame of reference for me that they couldn't even see it. Meanwhile, the dramatic irony of my secret continued to be a constant, bittersweet companion. Chloe, my granddaughter, was flourishing. The Paul and Margaret M. Legacy Scholarship had, as I'd hoped, given her wings. She was a star in the environmental science department, her name appearing on the dean's list every semester. She was the president of the campus sustainability club and was working on an undergraduate research project with a prominent professor. She was everything I had ever dreamed she would be. The university held an annual luncheon for its top scholarship, recipients, and representatives of the donors. My invitation arrived addressed to the trustee of the Paul and Margaret M. Legacy Scholarship. My attendance was requested. For a week, I was paralyzed with anxiety. The thought of being in that room, of Chloe seeing me there, of the secret being revealed in such a public, awkward way, was terrifying. With a heavy heart, I had my lawyer, Arthur, RSVP on my behalf, citing a prior, unchangeable engagement for the anonymous trustee. At our next Sunday dinner, Chloe was buzzing with stories from the event. "Oh, Grandma, it was amazing," she said. "I met so many incredible people, and the donors who were there were so inspiring. The representative for my scholarship couldn't make it, though." She looked genuinely disappointed. I wrote a thank you letter, a really long one. I just wanted them to know. I wanted to tell them what a difference their faith has made. It's not just the money. It's knowing someone believes in you that much. It makes me want to change. The world. I sat there, stirring my iced tea, the praise for my anonymous self washing over me. I felt a surge of pride so immense, it almost choked me, followed by a profound ache of loneliness. She was honoring me, but she didn't know it. My greatest act of love had to remain my most closely guarded secret, creating an invisible wall between us even as it paved her way. The end of my junior year was marked by a quiet, personal triumph. I submitted a paper on the Economic Agency of Female Artisans in 14th century Florence to a regional undergraduate history conference. To my astonishment, it was accepted. I was invited to present my research. The thought of speaking in front of a room full of academics and students was terrifying, but Liam and Dr. Alastair convinced me I had to do it. I stood at that podium, my knees knocking, and I spoke about women who, centuries ago, had found ways to assert their power and create their own legacies in a world that tried to render them invisible. As I spoke, I wasn't just talking about them, I was talking about myself. When I finished, the applause was warm and genuine. Dr. Alastair gave me a proud, beaming smile. It was one of the most validating moments of my life. That Sunday, I told my family about it. "That's wonderful, Mom," Tom said, his attention already drifting back to the football game on the television. "Good for you." Karen smiled and said, "How nice." They didn't ask what the paper was about. They didn't ask to read it. It was to them another pleasant but ultimately insignificant detail from my quaint hobby. The hurt, I realized in that moment, had finally receded. It was no longer a sharp sting, but a dull, chronic ache of acceptance. They would never see me. They couldn't. But it no longer mattered in the same way. I had found a community that did. As I began my senior year, I was fully immersed in my honors thesis, a deep dive into the subject of my conference paper. I felt a sense of purpose that was sharp and clear. I was no longer a ghost in my own life. I was a historian, on the verge of completing the work I had set out to do. Chloe, too, was entering her senior year, a celebrated student, poised on the brink of a brilliant future. Our parallel paths, which had run so close together on this campus, were hurtling towards a final shared destination: graduation. And I knew, with a certainty that was both thrilling and terrifying, that our two stories were about to converge in a way none of them could ever have predicted.